Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you haven't already, please go ahead and smash that thumbs up button and like and subscribe to the channel. Today we're going to be continuing with our Pioneer SX-838 restoration. And specifically, we're going to be looking at the filter capacitors. So there's a lot of controversy on whether you should change the filter capacitors or not. My 2 cents is if you test them and they're within spec, go ahead and keep them. If you test them and they're out of spec, go ahead and change them. Or if you see something like this, which is exactly what I see in the case today. So that clues me in to take a little bit deeper investigation. So why don't you guys come in closer and we'll take a look and see if these capacitors are any good. So here are our 2 filter capacitors here, guys. And so we're going to go ahead and test those. They're rated at 8,000 microfarads at 50 volts. So in order for this capacitor to test good, it has to be within a plus or minus 20% tolerance. And so what that means is that for this capacitor to test good, it either has to be greater than 6,400 microfarads all the way up to less than 9,600 microfarads. As long as it's in between those two parameters, as far as capacitance, it'll test good. But it also has to meet the ESR standard. And ESR basically stands for equivalent series resistance. And I'm going to break it down really simple. And basically, a high resistance means the capacitor is more likely to fail. It's going to generate more heat, and it's probably going to have some kind of issue later on. And so we really want a low ESR. And for this particular capacitor, it needs to have an ESR less than 0.02 or lower for it to test good. So in order to test this, we will need a piece of test equipment. I'm going to be using my Peak Atlas ESR 70, and I like this test equipment for 2 reasons. One, I find that it's very accurate. When I use it on multiple different sizes of capacitors, it's always giving me a very accurate response. And the other thing I like about it has an automatic discharge feature. And basically, if a capacitor has a charge, it'll discharge that capacitor to make sure that there's no spark or give you any other problems. So just some added safety to it. So in order to use this, this test equipment comes with 2 leads. It doesn't matter which lead goes where, but we're just going to attach it to the positive and negative side of the capacitor. Once we do that, we're just going to hit the on test button. And this particular capacitor is measuring at 4,762 microfarads with an ESR of 0.32. So that's way out of spec, and that capacitor needs to come out. So at this point, we could really stop. There's no need in testing the other one, because if I'm going to replace one, I'm going to replace the other one as well. But just for the sake of completeness, let's go ahead and test it so you guys can see what it's at. And so this filter cap is testing better, but still outside of spec. It's testing at 5166 microfarads with an ESR of 0.05. So neither one of these filter capacitors are within spec. So both of them are going to have to come out and be replaced. So we'll go ahead and get set up, and let's do that, guys. All right, so let's talk about how we're going to change these filter capacitors. And so before we get started, guys, I highly recommend that you take a couple of pictures so you don't get confused later on, or try to use your memory to remember how these wires are attached to the capacitors. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now, and I'll throw them up on the screen. Once we've got some pictures taken, basically what we're going to have to do, guys, is we're going to have to remove these wires from each of the capacitors. And so I'm not going to try to unwind these or unsolder them. I'm just going to cut the wires. I've got some extra length. If I need to, I can make them longer, and then just cut them off. And so if you notice, though, there's a resistor in between the terminals of the capacitor. And so this resistor, I believe, is a 2-watt resistor measuring at 2.7 kilo ohms. And so basically the purpose of this resistor is to discharge the capacitor over time, just to give it a little bit of extra added safety. And so I'm not going to save this resistor. I've got some of these. And so when we go ahead to install the new filter capacitors, I'm going to go ahead and put a new resistor in between the terminals as well. So very important, guys, that when you're doing this, you're having situational awareness of where the positive and the negative side of the capacitor is. For instance, on this capacitor, this is the positive side and this is the negative side. However, you'll notice that the black wire goes to the negative side on this one, but on the next capacitor, the black wire is actually going to the positive terminal of that capacitor, and the other wires, the white wires, are going to the negative side. And so this is important to make sure we get this orientation correct, because you're going to have a positive rail and a negative rail voltage that goes to your receiver. And so if you get this backwards, you could risk damaging the receiver, or it just won't work or come out of protection. So very important that we get that correct. The other thing we want to take into consideration, guys, is these are older capacitors, and so they're much larger than what the new capacitors are. So these are rated at 8,000 microfarads and 50 volts. However, the new capacitors I'm going to be putting in are rated at 10,000 microfarads and are 100 volts. And as you can see, they are much smaller diameter than what these are. So we're going to have to figure out how we're going to get those installed as well. And so I've got an idea for that as well. The next thing we'll have to take into consideration is how long these terminals are. And so they didn't give us a lot to work with. So for us to get all the wires attached, we're going to have to extend these a little bit so we can get everything attached. And I've got an idea I'll show you guys on what I usually do for that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and get my things together, guys, and we'll meet back here and we'll start working on this. All right, so let's go ahead and get these capacitors out of here. All right, guys, so we're ready to go ahead and get to work on getting these capacitors swapped out. And so I just wanted to show you guys the size difference of these two capacitors. So we're really going to have to make up some space if we want to get these clamps to work. And what we're going to do to accomplish that is we're going to use this foam, and we'll cut out a circle with this foam, and we'll basically put that in the middle and use the space of the foam to basically hold on to the clamp or the capacitor. And so that'll make up that space difference. As far as getting these terminals longer, so we have more space to put the wires on, I'm going to basically clamp one of these onto each end and solder it on. And that'll give me plenty of space to get the wires attached. And then I'll put on my resistors as well. I didn't have any 2.7 kilo ohm resistors. All I had was some 1Ks. So I'm going to use these. I think that'll be more than enough. If not, I'll order the other ones. But I think this will be more than enough for these capacitors. And so I'm going to start by removing this red layer off of these. And to do that, all I'm going to do is just kind of hold on to the terminal itself and then grab just the plastic version and just twist it off. And it'll come right off. So I'll repeat that for all of these. That way I can see what I'm clamping onto the capacitors and also my solder as well. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, there we have it. So we've got the resistors soldered in between. We've got them mounted in the clamps, so I can just tighten these clamps up and they're ready to go back in, and we're ready to start wiring them into the receiver itself. So with a little bit of time and patience, guys, this is going to work out just fine. These capacitors don't get hot, so I'm not worried about this foam or anything. And it's not electrically conductive, so don't have to worry about that. So these are ready to rock and roll, and they actually look really good. Looks like a professional done it. How about that? So let's get ready and get the receiver back up here, and let's put them in their stereo. All right, guys, so here we are back on the bench. We've got our capacitors installed, and I paid close attention to the orientation of where the positive and negative terminals of the capacitor is, just to make it easier to hook up my wires. So I'm going to throw a picture of what it looked like up on the screen, and then I'll explain where we're going to put these wires at. So these red wires here are going to go to the positive side of this capacitor, and then we're going to have a jumper wire here go from this negative to this positive of this capacitor. This black wire here is going to go to the positive of this capacitor, and these two white wires are going to go to the negative of this capacitor. And so that's how the correct orientation is to rehook this back up. Again, like I said before, guys, if you're doing this, make sure that you take a picture, so that way it just makes it easier for you to remember and to review your notes before you install this back together. The other big piece of equipment I'm going to use, guys, and I've pointed this out in other videos, is my wire wrapper. And so this just makes a mechanical connection and basically wraps around a terminal, and it's kind of close to what the original did, if not exactly the same. I really love this tool. I'll put a link in the description below. I highly recommend, if you're going to be working on vintage equipment, a lot of it, or if you're just doing yours and you want it to look as close to manufacturer original as possible, go ahead and invest in one of these and get a quality one, and you'll have it forever. So I'm going to go ahead and start on this, guys. And so just sit back and enjoy the view, and I'll get going. All right, guys, so that went pretty smooth, and so I was able to get all the wires wrapped up, and so this is kind of what it looks like. I'll throw a picture up on the screen just as a close-up, but you guys can see that I wrapped all the wires on there. And if you're not sure of the wrap, or you don't get a good wrap, you can always hit it with some solder just to kind of strengthen it up. But I'm pretty happy with these, so I'm going to leave them alone. Let me zoom you guys out, and then we'll go ahead and turn this on and make sure we still get relay click and it still plays music. All right, guys, here we are back on the bench after changing out the filter capacitors in this Pioneer SX-838. Let's go ahead and fire it up and make sure we did everything right. Turn on my dim bulb tester, and then let's turn on the receiver and see if we get a relay click. Ah, music to my ears. There's the relay click. So it looks like we had a successful repair, guys. If you guys enjoyed this content and hopefully learned something from my tips and tricks today, please make sure to smash that like button and subscribe to the channel. I look forward to seeing you guys in future videos. Thanks, and have a good day.